Have you ever noticed your body reacting before you even understand why? Maybe you smell a certain food and suddenly feel hungry. Maybe you hear a specific song and your mood instantly changes. Or maybe you walk into a place and feel uneasy for no obvious reason. You didn't decide to feel that way. Your body reacted automatically. This raises an interesting question. How can something completely neutral, a sound, a smell, or a place, suddenly trigger a strong physical or emotional response? Why does the brain attach meaning to things that originally meant nothing? To answer that question, we need to look at one of the most important discoveries in psychology, a learning process called classical conditioning. Classical conditioning describes how the brain forms associations between events. When two things repeatedly happen close together in time, the brain begins linking them. Eventually, one event can start triggering a reaction that originally belonged to the other. But to understand how this works, we need to start with something much simpler: reflexes. Your body already has many built-in responses. If food touches your tongue, your mouth produces saliva. If something suddenly appears near your eye, you blink. If you hear a loud noise, your heart rate increases. These reactions are automatic. You do not learn them. They are part of your biological survival systems. Psychologists call these unconditioned responses. They happen naturally. Now imagine a completely neutral event: a tone, a light, a specific sound. At first, that stimulus means nothing to your body. It does not trigger a reflex. It does not activate a biological response. It is simply information. But something interesting happens if that neutral stimulus repeatedly appears just before something meaningful. The brain begins linking the two, and eventually the neutral stimulus becomes a signal. This idea was discovered accidentally in the early 1900s by a Russian physiologist named Ivan Pavlov. Pavlov was studying digestion in dogs. His experiments involved measuring how much saliva dogs produced when they were given food. Food naturally triggered salivation. That part was expected. But Pavlov noticed something strange. The dogs sometimes started salivating before the food appeared. Sometimes they salivated when they heard footsteps. Sometimes when they saw the food bowl. Sometimes when a lab assistant entered the room. At first, this seemed like a problem with the experiment. But Pavlov realized something important. The dogs had learned that certain signals predicted food. Those signals had become triggers. To test this idea, Pavlov designed a controlled experiment. He introduced a new stimulus that had no connection to food. A sound. Each time the sound played, food followed. A moment later, sound, then food, sound, then food, over and over again. At first, the sound meant nothing. The dogs only salivated when food arrived. But after repeated pairings, something changed. Eventually, the sound alone triggered salivation. The dogs had learned an association. In psychology, the food is called the unconditioned stimulus because it naturally produces a response. The salivation is the unconditioned response because it happens automatically. The sound begins as a neutral stimulus, but after repeated pairing with food, it becomes a conditioned stimulus, and the salivation triggered by the sound becomes a conditioned response. In other words, the reflex stayed the same, but the trigger changed. So how does the brain actually build this connection? The answer involves neural activity. Whenever something meaningful happens, specific networks in the brain activate. Food activates sensory pathways related to smell and taste. Those signals reach brain regions involved in digestion. Salivary glands are activated. The body prepares to eat. Meanwhile, a sound activates completely different circuits. Auditory pathways process the signal. Normally, those pathways have nothing to do with digestion. The two systems are separate. But when the sound and the food repeatedly occur together, those circuits activate at the same time, and neurons that fire together tend to strengthen their connections. Over time, the brain builds a pathway linking the sound to the digestive response. Eventually, the sound alone is enough to activate part of that pathway. The brain has learned a prediction. This reveals something deeper about how the brain works. The brain is not simply reacting to the present moment. It is constantly trying to predict what will happen next. If one event consistently appears before another, the brain treats the first event as a signal, and this pattern appears everywhere in human behavior. Consider food cravings. If someone repeatedly eats popcorn while watching movies, the smell of popcorn can eventually trigger hunger even if the person recently ate. The smell has become a signal. Or think about anxiety. If someone repeatedly experiences stress in a specific environment, that environment can eventually trigger anxiety on its own. The body prepares for something it expects to happen. This happens because classical conditioning allows neutral cues to gain predictive meaning. The brain is constantly learning which signals matter. But the story does not end there, because learned associations can also weaken. If the conditioned stimulus repeatedly appears without the expected outcome, the brain begins updating its prediction. The response gradually fades. This process is called extinction. Extinction does not erase the original learning completely. Instead, it reduces the strength of the association. The brain learns that the cue is no longer reliable. Understanding this mechanism helps explain many real-world behaviors. Phobias can form when fear becomes linked to harmless cues. Cravings can appear when environments become linked to rewards. Even emotional reactions can develop through repeated associations. But there is an important mental shift hidden inside this idea. Many people assume their reactions define who they are. I'm just an anxious person. I've always hated public speaking. I can't help reacting this way. But classical conditioning suggests something different. Some reactions are not identity. They are learned associations. Your brain connected events that happen together. And those connections can change when new patterns appear. This does not mean reactions disappear instantly. Associations take time to form, and they take time to weaken. But it does mean that many automatic reactions have a history. They were built through experience, and that leads to a bigger realization. Your brain is constantly learning from patterns. Every repeated pairing between events slightly reshapes the predictions your brain makes. The brain is not just storing memories. It is building models of the world. And classical conditioning is one of the most basic ways those models form. But this discovery leads to another important question. If classical conditioning explains how reflexes become linked to new cues, how do completely new behaviors form? How do actions become habits? How does the brain learn through consequences rather than signals? That question leads us to the next major discovery in psychology, operant conditioning. Because not all learning happens through association. Some learning happens through reinforcement, and understanding the difference reveals a much deeper picture of how behavior actually works. Thanks for watching Mind Mechanics.